Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Chat EbT. I'm your host, Mohammed Ebrahim Tayob. Now, we've spoken to a lot of CAs on the podcast, and we always hear this concept of CA as you can sort of do anything, right? But my guest today has done something really outside the box. I'd like to introduce everybody to the founder of myCAhub, Muhammed Ismail Bulbulia. Muhammad, thanks for joining us, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here on Chat EbT. I've watched a couple of episodes before. Thank you so much for having me as a guest today.
No, pleasure, man. All right, so, we speak about the career of CA, as I mentioned, but you went and created a company where you put it right there in the name. So tell us a little bit about myCAhub and your journey towards creating that.
Okay, cool, 100%. Yeah, I know you'd think or assume, because I have CA in the name of the company I started, myCAhub, that it was always, going to be in love at first sight with becoming a CA. But if we go into my journey, it's actually the total opposite. So I matriculated in 2012. I went to St. John's College, which is a great school here in Joburg. And I had the bittersweet happenstance of doing really well in school, which meant that I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I had no clue, as most 18-year-olds, about what I wanted to do after school. And my parents, more on the financial security side, were nudging me towards accounting, be a CA, etc. Yeah. But I had no clue what I wanted to do. My favorite subject in school was actually English. I really enjoyed writing and literature. And my parents are like, what are you going to eat, words? And in retrospect, I'm very thankful for the nudge, right? Because I did dip my toes while I was in varsity, and I'll get into that, into journalism. It's not easy at all,
no,
right?
No.
It's very romanticized, I would say. And I'm very happy being a CA now, but you wouldn't have thought about it 10 years ago. And that's actually what I'd also like to speak about as part of my CA journey, is to not box yourself in, right, by misconceptions and preconceptions, especially those that are based on the views of other people,
yeah,
right, where you actually could end up living out your life at the whim of someone else, whether it's a culture or a religion or someone's expectations and not your own, which I did find myself doing at a point in my journey. So to get to the crux of it, I finished matric and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I applied for everything. I got in for everything. My parents nudged me towards CA stream, and I said, okay, let me try it out at Wits. And in my first year, my first 2 years, so I despised accounting, but funny enough, that's why I'm saying, when you think about my company today, myCAhub, and I love being a CA today, but actually I despised accounting, or rather, what I thought was the associations that people made with accounting and studying accounting. So people thought that, studying accounting is boring, it's technical, that you could only do so much, and I let that influence my views towards accounting, especially in first year and second year. So I spent a lot of my time not studying accounting. I'm very involved with girls and campus politics, and you can get through that in first year, second year. By third year, you can't mess around. Yeah, exactly. You can't mess around anymore. And I failed all 4 subjects in third year. It's all 4 subjects, and it was a real turning point in my life and in my journey, actually, because coming off the high of doing really well at school, I was actually Dux scholar at St. John's. So coming off that, being known for academics, and lauded for that, to failing all 4 subjects, and by being not invested at all, and by having such a fear of accounting, or what being an accountant would be in my head, that I built it up. And I remember having this conversation with my parents, and they're like, what's going on? What are you going to do? What's the next steps? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, okay, let me give it a proper try, right? And let me unyoke myself, right, from other people's expectations and other people's worldview of what it means to be an accountant. And so in third year 2.0, I jumped back into it. And to my complete amazement, I found that I actually really enjoyed the subject matter of what I was so afraid to get into in the first place. My personal favorite subject was management and finance.
Likewise, to be honest.
Exactly, costing and also from the small scale of costing products to the large scale of strategy and running a company, I enjoyed that. I also got a lot of insights from tax that has been so beneficial in running my business today that I would have never considered being useful back then, you know, so in fact, having spoken to many entrepreneurs from many different backgrounds, I'll say the one thing that most people wish they had more of was an accounting background, understanding finances. It's one thing to be able to sell or to run a business in that stead, but people get caught up or tripped up on finances. They don't even know where to start. So it's kind of like a superpower having had that background, you know, as a CA, being forced to study those 4 subjects, that actually when you start a business, to me, at least, I found it a huge advantage much later, you know. It's like Steve Jobs says, you can only connect the dots looking back. Yeah. So for me, I gave it a real shot, and I found that, you know what, I actually really enjoyed accounting, and I even ended up tutoring Manford too. And then like I passed 3rd year, I passed CTA at Wits, and then I got into articles at Deloitte. And I enjoyed articles. I enjoyed corporate. I learned a lot. I learned a tremendous amount. And I've also said, I stand it on record to say that the myCAhub program of, you know, the 3 year of articles is an invaluable part of the program where you learn so much that you could never study previously, especially around soft skills. For me, I learned a tremendous amount when it came to soft skills, people management, dealing with a client, dealing with your manager, seeing how the manager deals with a partner. I learned a tremendous amount, and it actually proved to me that you don't need to be the best technically to do well in corporate or otherwise. You know, and in fact, oftentimes, or it could be that having or drilling down on technical proficiency is not necessarily what's needed to progress in corporate, as exactly as compared to some of the overlooked softer skills, which could be much more important. So I learned a tremendous amount.
And the important thing, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think the important thing that a lot of people oversight, I'm so happy you mentioned soft skills, because I fully agree with you. And I always say this, is that the soft skills is what you can take with you in any other journey that you take upon. You know, the technical side, yes, it's important 100%, but the things that you mentioned, people management, you know, client management, dealing with different managers, dealing with different partners, those are the skills that you can take and, you know, open up a restaurant and they'll be applicable. You can go, you know, do consulting and it will be applicable. You can actually do anything and those skills are still going to stick with you. Where the technical aspect, yes, there's very specific niches for that, and it is needed, but you know, those are not the things that you might take into your next career.
Most definitely, and especially with the technical aspect, more and more of that, especially on the surface level or the base level, is being replaced or given to GPT, you know, to AI, right? So for the deeper stuff, definitely, but the surface level stuff, no. And thinking that you're going to differentiate yourself on that level, I think is a mistake, not anymore. It's most definitely on the communication skills, on the planning, etc. And in fact, that stood me in, like those were the skills that were very transformative and foundational in my entrepreneurial journey, which I started after articles, which I'm going to get to. And the thing is, it's a trial by fire in articles, but it's great because you're thrown into the deep end, you know, and you do get training, but you learn on the job.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's great because also at the end of it, it's not as if you could, this is why I say myCAhub article specifically, it's not as if you could mess up in your learning that they could fire you for, you know, you're still part of the program and learning in that. You have 3 years, and this is why, now I'm speaking to articles trainees, like make the most of your articles journey, you know. Make the mistakes, and not intentionally, but use that as much as possible because you're basically in a 3-year period where you can make the most of that period and and set yourself up for success post articles. Whereas if you, a few people kind of coast through or don't make the most of it.
I just need to finish the 3 years. I need to finish my hours and competencies. 100%. No, I fully agree. You know, I actually I was on a podcast recently where I was a guest, and you know, it will be a very, very long story here, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I went into it, and the short version of the story is that I actually got recognized prior learning, right? in my articles. And till today, I mark that as the biggest mistake I ever made in my career.
For real.
Right? Because of what you just said. The 3 years are vitally important. And the fact that I did 2 instead of 3, and in that time you think, hey, you know what, I'm gaining a year, you know, I get to be a CA 1 year earlier, honestly probably put me back about 4 to 5 years in my career. So agree fully with what you're saying. It's so important. And you know, there was a lecturer once that told me is that everybody complains about, you know, the pay of articles. It's horrible.
Most
It is what it
definitely.
is. But what you are getting is actually essentially a bargain, because that shouldn't be looked at as your first job. That should be looked at as a continuation of your studies. So you're actually getting paid to be studied, to study rather. You should actually, and I do not vouch for this, but you should actually be paying for it. But yes, let's get killed with comments on that. But it's a true fact. Like, yes, unfortunately, yeah, article clerks and even in other professions don't get paid that much. But the value that you're taking away from it, if you do it the right way, invaluable, man.
That, you know, that's, I think, the best way I've heard it put, where it's a continuation of your learning until, correct, and you'd see post articles as potentially your first job. Because, I mean, exactly with the pay, you're also not paid on the level or get the pension plan with, you know, most of the other employees that come in at first. But it's a delayed gratification, I think, and a delayed payoff that is worth it, but you can only see it looking back. You can only see it looking back from my experience. And so for me, but I learned a tremendous amount. There was 2 specific things that I learned in articles, in my articles period, however, that did change my life. And what I learned was to take a values-based approach to life. And what that means is by the time you're in articles 25 or so, looking back on your life, right, and identifying your values. And the way to do that is by looking back and saying, you look at experiences. When did I feel fulfilled? When did I feel trapped? When did I feel on top of the world? When did I feel like, you know, stretched or challenged? And by the time I was in 3rd year's articles, I think I'd lived enough of life to be able to do this, because I was also asking the big question of what next, you know, and what else, what am I going to do with my life? And by doing this exercise, I identified my values as freedom and independence. Freedom and independence. And it was by looking back, for example, I just could not stand. I hated not being able, not having control over my own time in articles, right? It was a thing with me personally. And I understood, obviously, having to do it then, but you know, sometimes you may be performing to your capacity or well, and there's nothing wrong with your work, but because of the nature of the project or the nature of the engagement or what a partner wants, they could come in and say, no, we're working overtime tonight. And I just remember that feeling and like seeing like the sand of my life. There. Yeah, literally like flowing through my hands. And so I realized that I didn't like that. And I also didn't like being told what to do, in the sense that if I have an idea, or if I want to execute on an idea that I have, I don't want to run it by a committee, you know, for approval. I just want to test it out, try it, and see what's going on. So I realized that my values are freedom and independence, which was a transformational exercise. Taking the time to understand your values makes it much easier looking forward to make decisions, because you can simply, when you're faced with an option or a decision in your life, you can play it out and say, does this work towards my values? So for example, in starting my company, so after articles, right, I knew I didn't want to go back into corporate. I wanted to start my own thing based on that freedom and independence. Okay. But I didn't know what, right? I didn't know where to start. So I had applied for other jobs. I got offers. I actually, in a moment, in fear, right, because it was also the end of COVID, I'll be honest, yeah, it was one of the lessons that I've learned. In fear, I took the interviews. But at the core, I realized, no, I want to try my own thing. What is it? I don't know. So January 2021, I was finished with my articles. And I sent my, to get the CA designation from SAICA, the certificate. So I sent that in. And while I was waiting for that, my dad is an optometrist. So he's been doing CPD, the continuing professional development points and so on for years. So I was like, I wonder what my CPD requirements are. So then I logged onto SAICA's website, and then I saw that they had actually changed the CPD policy in the prior year, in 2020. They made it quite a bit more admin intensive. So it previously was based on points. Now they had eliminated the points. Under the current policy, points, there's no points anymore. And instead, each SICA member, so CAs, AGASAs, and ATSAs, all SICA members have to produce and maintain a reflective plan, a document called a reflective plan, each year, from January to December each year. And there's different there's a format it needs to be in with different phases, and they've got competencies. And I read through this, and like a light bulb went on in my head. And I knew from articles that CAs hate admin, and you just don't have time. I know from the newly qualified CAs, from the articles traders through to the partner, nobody had time. Everyone was pressed for time. So it was the genesis of an idea where I thought, okay, well, what if I could put together software, a solution that makes compliance as easy as possible. That was the seed of the idea. And then build something around that. And so with that journey, like I said, it took double the time, double the money. I launched in April 2021, myCAhub.co.za, CPD toolkit, this, that. And nobody cared. And nobody cared. And that was also a fantastic lesson because I learned that even though you can have a quality product, right, even though you can have a quality service, if you're not able to convey that effectively, I learned a deep lesson about marketing and advertising and how sales is the lifeblood of the business. So there's 3 ways to get money into a business. One is equity, so you give up shares and you get money. Second is a loan, so you take in money and then you pay interest. But the best way is via sales, is via revenue, by actually selling a product or a service that consumers want, that pay, that you're not relying and you're not giving anything up. In fact, you're getting in tune with what your users and what your customers want. So for me, it was a great journey and a great lesson of how to sell, learning how to sell, how to speak the language of sales when it comes to copy, when it comes to psychology, when it comes to going to where your target audience are. Originally, I was on TikTok, I was on Instagram, I was posting, and honestly, you have to try. When you're beginning, when you're starting off, you have to try everything because you don't know what's going to hit. So I recommend, and you try it out. It's not, nothing's lost. You learn something from it. And for me, what I learned is like, CAs are on LinkedIn. Everyone's on LinkedIn looking for the next job. You know what I'm saying? So I went to where my target market was. And through another thing that, another obstacle I learned is, and just being honest about it, is that a lot of CAs and a lot of professionals don't care about CPD admin. It's often at the back of their mind or the last thing on their mind because they have so many more things that are important. I understand that. Don't delude yourself or don't sell to yourself what you want, Sell to your target audience. So for me, it was firstly being honest and eliminating a large percentage of the potential target market. You say all 50,000 CAs need to be compliant with CPD. But if you actually speak to CAs and you actually you learn that, for example, most of the big 4 companies or a lot of big companies will have their own exact internal solution. And even though my product and my service is better and saves more time, and even if you wanted to quantify it with numbers, there's no incentive, and you've also got to think in the mind, what I learned is you've got to think in the mind of the person making the decision inside the company. The HR manager or the L&D manager now has to justify an additional expense item, right, to their company. Is that going to make them look good, etc.? Does it work? You've got to think like in the mind of, your potential, whoever that may be. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about that, how to position, how to frame. And it's been a real roller coaster ride. But 5 years later, in fact, it's just after April now, 2026, 5 years, and we're still in business, we're still alive. There were some points when it was sketchy, bro, when it was dodgy. In the first 3 years, especially when I didn't know, when I was learning about what my target market wanted. In fact, you have to speak to your customers every day. To me personally, like you have to speak to your target audience to understand them, to understand what they want, not what you think they want. So it's been a real journey, but 5 years later, I can say around year 3, I really nailed that product market fit and things took off. I was able to give CAs what they want when it comes to CPD compliance and then expand on our business. So the core offering is, our CPD, exactly. But then a lot of people were asking me for merch. You know, I was hosting, actually, I was always trying new things, different things. I used to go to myCAhub events. I used to sponsor golf holes. Imagine you come to tee off on a golf day and there's a guy speaking to you, has a table about CPT. Right? Exactly. But I tried. I used to try everything. And other people seem to too. And the lesson, I guess, or the point I want to bring there is in, again, not letting yourself be governed by fear. I still feel fear. I feel fear to this day, right? But I know allowing my decisions to be influenced or to come from a place of fear, from a scarcity mindset. Another thing I had, especially in the early days, is a scarcity mindset, where you think there's only so much that is out there or available to be attained.
A lot of people get stuck because of that.
Most definitely. And in here, especially, I had it too. And especially when you're starting off, when you're desperate, when you don't see the promise of more, right? So I can understand it, right? But it is very limiting. And in fact, I would encourage people to have an abundance mindset, even if you are in those circumstances where you think you're scarcity, or where things are scarce. So for example, because for me, I've realized in taking on this abundance mindset where I don't have to get money for every single thing, right? That the value of things is more than money, right? And even if you don't get anything in return for something you've tried or something you've given, that's okay.
You're getting a lesson back in the time.
Most definitely. And oftentimes, just by the nature of reciprocity, right? Human beings, you'd often find yourself in taking on opportunity or being exposed to opportunities you never anticipated before by simply giving first or giving a little first or not being worried about being taken advantage of. I understand. You've got to be skeptical and you've got to be sharp, right, in business and in life. But perhaps it's better to err on the side of generosity where things come tenfold back. It's just been my experience, right?
No, but actually, I'm glad you said that because it goes back to what we said about the articles, right? A lot of people have that outside. It's like, oh, these firms are taking such big advantage of us, and that's and we should be paid more and everything like that. But at the expense of, hey, listen, there's a lot of value to be taken out from this. So it's a very important point you're mentioning. Is I think we always sort of focused on that. Oh no, you know what? I should be making this much, or I should be getting this much. But sometimes there's much other benefits down the road that you can't even see at the moment.
Most definitely, and think out the box. So on that, for someone in articles, right, from my experience, advice I could give, and this is for people in articles, but anyone can, think along this flavor. And so in articles, people want to differentiate themselves, right, against being a CA, against other CAs, right, understandably. So people will go into a CFA, which is a crazy amount of work, and it's really hard in the exam. And you're doing more studying, like, are you nuts, bro? Like, what? Or people will take on more courses or whatever. But the thing is, everyone is doing that because that's the easy thought. That's the easy thought. What should I do? That's what you know. Oh, just study more, right? Yeah. My advice, if I could go back, or what would I do? I would set up aside from my salary, from my meager salary, I would set apart maybe 1,000 rand or some money each month on coffee, on taking people out to lunch. I would take
such an important
I would take 1 or 2 people out to lunch every single week. I would make a concerted effort and I would pay for their bill, whether it's a director or a partner or whatever. I would just try and make as many connections. And even by being that jacked up, you see, firstly, you're filtering. If someone responds positively to you, you've got someone on your vibe. If someone responds negatively to you, you don't even want that person in your life in the first place. You've taken them out, you've taken out a waste of your time in your life by filtering immediately. And then the people that respond to you, in my opinion or my understanding, they'll be impressed, they'll be invested. You're setting yourself up by investing time and energy and a little bit of money and getting over that initial fear of what will they say, right? But you're setting yourself up by doing something different. You'll have so many relationships for what, 1,000 rand a month. You could not match that, I think. I did this. I did this by taking users out to coffee. I did this by taking my members and other CAs and just meeting up with people and charging it as an entertainment expense on the company, which is a win-win. Yeah.
No, and it's actually a brilliant aspect. You don't think about it like that, but very, very valuable lesson that.
Thanks, yeah, and I didn't do that. I only learned this later. So that to me is like a tip for anyone in corporate actually. Like, Rather, take people out for lunch. Spend time with the person so they can see who you are, so they can get to know you. And someone will feel flattered, and you never ever know. You never ever know when people will remember 5 years later, 6 years later, when they are potentially in a place that could benefit you. Not that you're doing it for that reason, but you never know.
No, brilliant. I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up. And in all honesty, you've given us quite a few messages, right? My general question that I ask at the end of my interviews is, what message would you like viewers rather, to take away from this chat today, right? Now, you've given quite a few brilliant insights there, but I'm going to ask you for one more.
100%. No, I think, honestly, the foundation, right, the keystone, as I said, is a values-based approach. I know it sounds airy-fairy, but it changed my life forever. I'm not lying, right? And it's a simple, look, it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right? It's simple, but it's not easy. And it means taking the time to look back on your experiences and identify just three critical key values that you understand about yourself. Like I said, it's discovery. It's a process. It's not what you're saying. It's not a process of dictation. It's discovery. And once you learn your values, like it'll be tough, but take the time, understand your values, and you will be able to use that to guide your decision making in the future. You will know more of who you are, which is the first step to success and greatness. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. I actually completely agree with that. Use a lovely audit term that self-review is very important. But yeah, no, fully agree. It's very understated, that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me here today. I know I yapped.
No, it's been brilliant. One of the things I love about these interviews is, as you mentioned, similar to your example with the coffee, right? Is I get to take away something from each and every one of these interviews. So thank you very, very much for the lessons you've given, because honestly, at this stage of my life and career, you're never ever open to learning new things, and you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be ever opposed to learning new things. And so yeah, taken away some great insights. So more importantly, thank you. I'm going to apologize in advance because I feel like we're going to have you many more times on the show, and we're going to nag you consistently to come back. But thanks, man, for being here, and we wish you guys all the best at myCAhub, and continued success, man.
It's only a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm keen to be back. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. All right, that's our show. Not going to say more than what Mohammed just said. Let's go with a value-based approach. My name is Mohammed Ebrahim Tayob, and you're watching Chat EbT. Until next time.